UCF falls to Colorado to lose 10 out of their last 13. Is it time for Johnny Dawkins to go?
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. Joining me as he does every single weekend is my good friend, Andrew Gluco from The Last Word on Sports. First word on this topic, UCF falls to Colorado in Boulder. Andrew, this was the worst loss of the year. And it's getting exhausting coming on here week after week talking about losses. But before we get to the superlatives, I think we got to talk about the negatives here. UCF falls to Colorado 76-63. They shot a meager 34% from the field. That's 21 of 61, missing 33% of their shots there. They only had 8 turnovers. They somehow forced 19, but they didn't score a lot of points off those turnovers. So, this was a tough loss. This was a hard loss in a game where you didn't do a lot of things well.
This is basically Colorado played the same game both halves. This comes down to UCF's second half once again collapsed, shooting barely over 24% from the field in the second half, 2 of 10 from 3-point range. I mean, they got out rebound 31-15 in the second half. They had 2 assists and a bunch of fouls. And the funny part is they only committed 2 turnovers in the second half. They just couldn't hit the side of a barn. I mean, just everyone, outside of Mahovski had a bad shooting day in the second half. Mikey Williams, 2 of 7. Keyshawn Hall, 2 of 7. Darius Johnson, 1 of 5. I mean, and it went downhill from there. So we talk about the worst loss of the year, and statistically it is. This is the only loss UCF has had against a team outside the top 100 net. But that's the crazy. Worst of all is Colorado was 0-13 in the conference with a 13-game losing streak. And congrats, UCF, you allowed that to be snapped against you. I mean, this is a calamity of things going wrong. And I watched this game, and it's like it was bad shooting, bad positioning, getting absolutely torched on the glass. I'm watching this game just really frustrated. It's like this is just depressing to watch. It's like not only are they playing down to the competition, which Colorado is not a great team. They did not look great. They were turnover prone, just a lot of mistakes. And UCF basically played down to them and decided, hey, let's give you time and time again to try to win this game. And, they basically gave the game to Colorado because Colorado sure as heck did not look great in the process.
Yeah, this was a bad case of if you can go low, we can go lower. And they certainly did. Look, obviously this wasn't this was a terrible loss. When you're looking at Colorado, they came into this game a combined 1 of 15 in quad 1 and 2 games. They beat absolutely nobody this year, and you lost to that team. Like you said, it was the first loss to a team outside the net top 100. They came in at 107, Andrew. So, again, really bad loss for Johnny Dawkins and his squad. Going into some other stats on the game, I mentioned earlier they shot 34% from the field. They were 26% from 3, 6 of 23 from 3. Now, I didn't really kill them because they only gave up 32% for 3 from Colorado, 7 of 22. The Buffs were there from 3-point range. UCF scored 17 points off turnovers versus only 4 for Colorado. Looking at this, it comes back down to the same conversation we're having game after game, and that is no production from your bench. Keyshawn Hall and Darius Johnson have to be exhausted. They played 36 and 37 minutes in this game, respectively. Mustafa Cham 32 minutes in this game. These guys are dying out there, Andrew, just trying to keep them in it. And in the next segment, we'll talk about why that is. But this just seems like it's a hill too big to climb for UCF basketball.
Well, it's amazing. Niels Mahovski actually had the only real production off the bench, going perfect 5 for 5 from the field, 2 from 2 for 3-point range. Missed a free throw. He went up 1-2, and that was the only shot he missed. He scored 13 points, was third on the team. And if you look at his plus minus, he only had a -2, which was third best in the game for the Knights. All the starters were well into the negatives as far as the plus minus. He wasn't the problem. He's obviously not. He's more of a spot shooter. He's not really a make your own shot kind of guy. That's where the guys more like the Mikey Williams and the Keyshawn Halls kind of do, fit that. They're more of a create your own shot kind of guy. But I mean, he did his job. He did a yeoman's job on the floor. He played tough defense. He had 3 steals. He had 5 boards. That's a good game. That's a real good game. 2 assists. I mean, he was the team leader in assists with 2. Once again, UCF failed to really do much on the moving the ball. 8 assists on the game. A lot of isolation. It's the same thing over and over again. The second half just gets sloppy, and you get a lot of hero ball. They're not moving the ball. They're not maintaining their sets, and it gets to a certain point this poses a couple questions I know we're going to talk about today. Is this a coaching thing? Is this a development thing? Is this a recruiting thing? What is going wrong with this team, and can it be fixed? That's what we need to ask.
Nivs Mahovski, 5 of 5 from the field, 2 of 2 from 3. Almost a perfect game. He only hit 1 of his 2 free throws, but he added 5 rebounds, and he had only 2 personal fouls. He had 2 assists. Mahovski had a hell of a game. He
did his job.
Yeah, he did his job. He had 3 steals as well, too, in this one, Andrew. I think the problem for UCF is, he had 13 points, but you only had 17 points from the bench. So similar to the last game where Mikey Williams had 14 points, but you had about the same amount of points from the bench. It's usually just one guy from your bench who's having an okay game, and then no production from anybody else. So besides Mahovski, you had only 4 other points from your bench in this one, which means nobody in your starting lineup can have a bad game, or somebody has to have a superhuman game night in and night out, especially. So even if the team on the other side of the court is bad, if you're only going to get production from your starters, your every game is going to be a dogfight. And I think that's what UCF is facing. But hey, is it a development issue or is it a recruiting issue? We'll talk about that right after a quick word from our sponsor. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Factor. Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or keto. I've done keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege for 50% off and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get that 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LOCKEDONCollege at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege. Andrew, development issue or recruiting issue? Why is this bench not producing? Are guys just not getting better under Johnny Dawkins, or do you not have guys that can get better under Johnny Dawkins? It appears to me it might be a little bit of a mix of both.
It is mixed both. The first things first is your leading scorer from last year, Jalen Sellers, has played a whopping 3 games this year due to injuries. As a result, he's really had no impact on this year. That's strike 1. Strike 2 is there's not much continuity from last year to this year. You have a lot of new players. even young guys like Mustafa Sham is, he's a freshman. So he's brand new, Keyshawn Hall, Mikey Williams, all these guys brand new to the program. Only a few holdovers, Darius Johnson, Jalen Sellers being the main two. As I said, Sellers has been out. So, I mean, there's been a continuity problem. Having Sellers not here, and while you can make, the team did really well without him in the non-conference and stuff. Well, conference season, the wheels started falling off game 2 of conference play when they got 50, pointed by Kansas. It went downhill after that. Because we look at it, they beat, they had a great non-conference slate. Did really well. Obviously, the opening win against Texas A&M, all that stuff. They beat Texas Tech on the road to open Big 12 play. Thumped by Kansas. Then you have the 1-point win at home against Colorado. This is before Colorado really started falling apart. The close loss with Arizona, the win against Arizona State. So they've been kind of, you're 3-2 at this point in conference. And then you have the 1-point loss to Houston where you had them against the ropes and you let it slip. And you showed the world that you don't know how to finish some of these games because that's what it came down to. Missed free throws. They blew this game. Then the wheels start falling off. They get, 25 at Iowa, in Ames against Iowa State. They beat TCU, and TCU is not a great team. And then loss. 6 straight losses. Started with the close one against Kansas. Again, close loss. Game that they just couldn't figure out how to finish. Same thing. BYU, close loss. Game they couldn't figure out how to finish. And then it's just been getting worse. Then, they get beaten pretty soundly. They get 10 pointed by Cincinnati. They get beaten soundly at Baylor. And then they hung around against Iowa State, second half collapse. Colorado, second half collapse. I mean, all these games can really come down to the fact that they collapsed in the second half. They give up a ridiculous amount of points. And in Colorado's case, last time I checked, before this game, I think the last time Colorado scored more than 70 points was against a loss against Oklahoma State, January 18th. So that's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 losses that they couldn't score 70 points. And then UCF lets them score 76.
Yeah, but that's what happens when you're tired, right? Again, we talked about how many minutes the starters are playing in this one. At the end of the game, you are dog get tired, and they're scoring. You're giving up points at the end of the game, and then you can. And when let me tell you, at the end of the game, you talk to athletes about why they train the way they do. It's because at the ends of games, when your body is your mind is telling you that I'm exhausted, you need to be in good enough shape to hold form and perform when your body is under duress. But even the most well-trained athletes, that's hard to do night in and night out. If you don't have help and you can't get to the bench for a good, I would say 7 to 8 minutes a game. But, playing 36 and 37 minutes, which is practically the entire game, is just really hard for your top scorers.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing about Colorado against UCF. First time they played, UCF squeaked by with a 75-74 win. So Colorado scored 74 points in the first game. They scored 76 in this one, 38 in the first half, 38 in the second half. Consistent. It was UCF's offense that fatigue laughed at. They scored 27 points in the second half. So they got outscored by 11 points in the second half. It was a 2-point game at halftime. So this time it wasn't the defense failing. Well, granted, they failed enough, but it wasn't so much the defense failing as the offense was failing. But again, it comes back to the same thing. They're not moving the ball enough. They're tired, so they're just playing isolation because it gives guys around the isolator a chance to recover. They're using the offensive set to regain energy. The problem is they're not converting baskets. They go back the other way, out rebounded 52-29. So, there's the fatigue played a role there. Now the when you look at the offensive rebounds, UCF had 8 and Colorado had 16. So you had your second chance points there, and that offset a lot of the turnovers that Colorado had. Because Colorado played really sloppy. Really sloppy. That 19 turnovers against UCF's 8, and still, UCF, they converted on some of them. They out converted as far as points off turnovers, but still could not overcome the fact that they were just getting complete beaten on the glass, out of position. There was a lot of out of position play. And there was one time in the second half watching where, players were just kind of flailing all over the place. And there was an easy corner 3 as a result, because guys were just so out of position. Eventually, by the time this game got towards the end, these guys were just flailing.
But is that a coaching issue? Johnny Dawkins, as we talked about in previous episodes, there's some question about whether he would make it through to this season. He did. Should he make it through to next season? Is it time for a change with UCF basketball? We'll talk about that right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, guys, and there's no better place to get it than on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss opening tip or want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com and join the game. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Is it time for Johnny Dawkins to go? Is it time for him to pack his bags and find something else to do? How much of this do you put on Johnny? How much more time does Johnny Dawkins get to build this roster? And with the changes that are coming in NIL, Andrew, should you give him more time and a little bit of NIL dollars to play with to see if he can build a winner?
Last year he bought himself time by punching up. Finishing with a winning record, getting into the NIT. Nobody expected it. Likewise, much like Gus Malzahn was in football this year, this was a roster that was built to be competitive today. There's a lot of guys who are basically one-year rentals, and they're failing miserably. In fact, this season has a very good chance of ending below 500. The only season that Johnny Dawkins finished below 500 at UCF was 2020/21, where the season kind of got cut off early. They could have maybe turned that one around and finished above 500. Never got a chance to. But that was back in the American Athletic Conference. This is the Big 12 now. I'm a numbers guy. My 9 to 5 deals with a lot of dollars and making sure they're in the proper place and with regulatory stuff and all this other things. So I was very much against firing him last year for the sheer fact of UCF had limited money. They had a football problem. And, the question was, would there be blowback? It's hard to fire a guy who had a winning season in a situation he wasn't supposed to win. UCF wasn't supposed to win last year. This year, it's different. The team was supposed to be more competitive. This losing streak, this basically, the 6 in a row, which is the longest in Dawkins's tenure, and the 10 out of the last 13. That's what I think is going to do him in. UCF's finances are in a better place. They're still in the last year of the structured payments to the Big 12. So they're guaranteed a payment of $19 million. They're not going to get the full share this year. That starts next year. But I think UCF's in a much better position now as far as financially, since the situation with Gus Malzahn went about as well as you possibly could. UCF didn't have to worry about a buyout, and they were able to kind of cheapen everything a little bit financially through that maneuver. I think Johnny Dawkins will not survive the offseason. I don't see it happening. I think the collapse, if it was a team that just didn't do great, they kind of floated through, that'd be one thing. But this was a team that was picked that just a couple weeks ago was in the NCAA tournament, was firmly in the NCAA tournament, not even in the last in. They were firmly. And to not at this point, they're falling out of the NIT at this point. They're going to be a borderline NIT team today. By next week, they may be out completely. I mean, that's a major collapse. And UCF's, they proved that they can recruit and bring people in. They prove that they can punch above their weight class. They prove they are not the worst job in America. And I think that will be Johnny Dawkins' undoing. And I don't think he's going to survive the offseason.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. This is always a tough decision, I think, when you're talking about like, hey, should we make a coaching change or shouldn't we? Right? How much time do you give a coach to build a program in today's college athletics with NIL and it being a changing landscape, Andrew, right? Because if you're UCF, and we already know UCF was near the bottom of the Big 12 in terms of NIL spend last year. We looked those numbers up. So, if everyone else around you is spending money and you're not spending money, is it reasonable to think that, hey, you are where your spend is essentially, which is at the bottom of the league? Those are the questions I have. But then I've got other questions about, hey, what is, you've got like, we talked about Neves and him having almost perfect game. And you think to yourself, like, why haven't we seen this guy more this year? Right? And why has he been buried on the bench? Is that a coaching issue, right? Because if he could have been helping you this whole time, should they have worked Mikey Williams into the rotation faster if he could help you? Like, you're thin. You don't have a lot of help past your starters, and these guys are sitting on the bench, and it's now that it's all falling apart, it's like, oh, let's give Neves a chance and see what he can do, and then he goes 5 for 5 from the field, right? I just have questions about the decision making from a coaching standpoint, and again, I'm not on one side of the fence or the other. I just think that there are some tough questions that the people with the money have to ask about whether it's time to move on, or do you put a little resources behind Dawkins and see what he can do if you spend some money and try to go to the portal and get some better players.
Well, I mean, it's no surprise, that UCF is still way behind, against their contemporaries when it comes to basketball spend. They were way behind against the American. They underspend. I mean, you can see it especially in the women's team, which is just not a good program. Same problem. They had to blow that up when they lost their coach and have not recovered at all. But I mean, UCF has never been a basketball program. They're not a basketball school at all. If you look at them historically, they went to the tournament a few times under Kirk Spira in the doldrums of the Atlantic Sun / TAC back in the 90s and 2000s. But I mean, Johnny Dawkins is the only coach that ever brought them as an at-large to the NCAA tournament.
Right.
He's the only guy who's done it. And he's brought them to the NIT, 3 times now? And so, I mean, there's a certain point where you have to wonder, is this the ceiling for UCF basketball? Should they be better than this? Or is it just worth trying to be better than this? I've had discussions online with various people who have always been like, oh, it's tournament or bust. I go, not at UCF, it's not. You have to be able to prove that you can be an at-large team, at least on a slightly regular basis, before you can be tourney or bust. Right. Because you've been bust every year outside of the one time you were an at-large. I'm sorry, winning the Atlantic Sun does not count in my books. That's that's the low major of somebody's got to go. It's going to be you.
Fair. Okay, fair.
So they have the idea of tourney or bust is oh well, we just don't care about mediocrity. You're rooting for the wrong program. At one point, UCF basketball is where coaches went to die, where their careers went to go to pasture. Back in the early days of Division I, UCF basketball was absolutely atrocious. There is no history of success in Division I basketball when you think about it, outside of the bit that Kirk Spearraw did and what Johnny Dawkins has done. Donnie Jones in between I had a few good years in Conference USA, and I stunk in the American Athletic Conference. What UCF did when they fired Donnie Jones is, he had the 3 good years in CUSA. Then he had 3 bad years in the American, and then they cut him loose. UCF has more money to work with, and I think more desperation because there's more dollars at play. They need to keep bringing in the NIL dollars, and no one wants to back a loser. So you've got to do something. Look at what happened with football. We talked about how they reached out to a bunch of coaches, couldn't get any real nibbles. What got them going? Bringing back nostalgia through Scott Frost. Yeah. That's what got the money flowing in. Here, it's not going to be nostalgia. It's going to be an injection of fresh blood. I think a lot of fans have become just kind of apathetic towards Johnny Dawkins and this program. And I don't see them improving enough to close the year out to really stave that off, short of like some miracle run.
Yeah. That miracle run is going to be in the Big 12 tournament and an automatic qualifier to the NCAA tournament. Outside of that, I don't see it happening. But hey, look, you cannot afford for enthusiasm to wane if you're a coach, because you need those NIL dollars, and people don't want to give money to a loser, Andrew. That's just the name of the game in today's college athletics. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
Well, you can catch me on Twitter /X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew. You can catch my writings on The Last Word on College Football, a part of The Last Word on Sports family.
Thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your second listen, go check out our friends at Locked On Big 12. Our guy Drake Toll leads the conversation in conference realignment news and pulls no punches when it comes to talking about every team in the Big 12, including the UCF Knights. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast, and you can find us here tomorrow, Locked On UCF.